We're in a series this month called The Call of Duty. Cambridge Dictionary, and I love the way they define it. Cambridge Dictionary simply defines it like this: the feeling that you should do something because it is your duty. You didn't need someone to come along and say you need to do this. Or maybe you heard someone say, you know what, we need to do this, and something began to work on you in the back of your mind and says, you know, I need to be a part of that. One of the things that happened when we became followers of Jesus Christ, we were given a call of duty. We were called to greatness. Now, we all want to hear that word, don't we? When you gave your life to Jesus Christ, when you made a commitment to follow him, he looks at you and he says, I've called you to something more than. I want to call you to greatness. And all of us in the back of our mind begin to go, yeah, bring that on. That's exactly what I want. We think of guys who've done amazing things through life and through society, guys who have disrupted society, guys who started great businesses, and we're saying, well, if this is what God wants me, bring it on. But when Jesus began to call us to greatness, he turned the tables upside down. So what we thought he was saying is something different, or what we thought we heard is different than what he was actually saying. We started off 2 weeks ago when Jesus began to look at two of his disciples who began to say, hey, Jesus, we want to become first and second. You're not moving this organization along fast enough, and so we need to move this along a bit more. And we want to I volunteer to be second, and my brother, he volunteers to be third, all right? We'll do what it takes. And Jesus looks at him and he says, hey, the positions you're asking for require men of greatness. Do you think you can be that man? And they both said, yes, we can. And Jesus said, yes, you will, but what you're asking for, you do not know what it is you're asking for. And he calls his 12 disciples together, and he gives them this idea of what greatness looks like. Now, it is an upside-down version of greatness that does not meet with our expectations today. In fact, here's what Jesus says. In Matthew chapter 20, verses 25 through 27, he goes like this. So Jesus calls them together, and he says this. You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. Now, we know this, don't we? Because leaders do what? Leaders lead, and they always lead from the front. We know this. In order to lead from the front, what must you have underneath you? Followers. And when a follower starts pushing upward, what does a leader do? Well, normal leaders. Now, good leaders stop and say, I recognize something in you and I'm going to do something. Normal leaders do this. I don't like where you're going. Let me remind you and squash you. And Jesus said, we know how this works. Leadership usually stops and says, make sure you remind yourself that I am in front and you are not. I am the one who gets the wage, you do not. I am the one who gets the title, you do not. But Jesus goes on to say this, but among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. The greatness that Jesus was calling us to flips the tables upside down. Jesus says, I am calling you to greatness, but not a greatness that stops and see you as better than, but a greatness that will cause you to push others up. Now, last week as we started this process, we began to say the place that God calls us to be greatest in first is with our families. The ones that we say we love the most, and yet we behave the worst around. We're reminded that we are called to care for, to love, to respect, to build up, to lead others so that they can become their best. Now, if learning to serve our families wasn't hard enough, and by the way, it's the place that is probably the hardest, but it's also the place that we understand the most. For anyone who has children or who has raised children, or some of us who have grown children, we always understand this. It's not easy, but we do it because we love our kids. And we will gladly sacrifice for our kids. Not easy. It's difficult. Sometimes we know we're not what we should be, but we do it and we try because, hey, that's family. We were saying last week that in the South there's 3 things that are important: faith, family, and sweet tea. And I think the sweet tea comes first, but we understand the idea of family. But Jesus didn't stop there. He didn't just say, well, I want you to kind of close in on your families and I want you guys to be tight. He goes on and he stops and he says, it's not enough. Greatness must reach its fingers out farther than your families. In Romans chapter 12, Paul begins to help a Roman church begin to understand that there is a need for greatness that reaches farther than simply a family. Now, in Romans chapter 12, we're going to pick this up with verse 1, and I'm going to put in a shameless plug for Tuesday night, okay? We're only going to very briefly skim across this passage this morning. Tuesday night, we're going to try to get into it a little bit more, all right? We're going to stop and try to dig into this because we don't have the time this morning. Tuesday night, well, we don't have anywhere to be except eat cookies and drink coffee, and we got all the time in the world. In Romans chapter 12, Paul is looking at the Roman church, and he says this. He starts this passage, this chapter, and he starts by saying this. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be as a living and a holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Okay. I love this passage where Paul looks at us and he says, to those of you who say you're followers of Jesus Christ, I want you to think about how you live your lives as a sacrifice. We could almost say this, as a servant, as someone who gives of himself. Now, this way we live out, it should be a living sacrifice. He's not asking us to go out and die. He's saying, I'm saying as a living sacrifice and one that is holy. This word holy means one that is good. And I love the way he says this because he goes on to say, this is truly the way to worship him. We're going to start right there. Paul looks at the church and he's saying, guys, how do you truly show your love for God? How do you show your love towards one who gave himself for you and has done everything? How do you truly show your love and worship to him? For $19.95, I can show you. No. he stops and he reminds them. It does not have to do with any kind of how much you pray, the songs you sing. He begins to say this: there is a way that you live life that truly shows others your love for God. There is a way that we can show our duty to him. Now, as Paul continues, he stops and he says there's two different things that I'm going to focus on. One is just going to be a brief mention, and then I'm going to get stuck into the other. Now, he mentions number two because if number two doesn't happen, or number one, it's hard to do number two without the number one. So he goes on into verse 2 and he says this: don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. So Paul starts and he says this: here's how do we truly worship God. One of the things is you have to change your mindset. You need to allow God to change your life by the way you think. Why? Because normal people think normal thoughts. Jesus said earlier, you know that leaders choose to lord it over or choose to be above everyone. You know that those who are in leadership like to flaunt their positions, their titles. They like the name tag on their badge. But I want you to think of leadership and greatness as something different. So as Paul is coming into Romans chapter 12, he's looking at him saying this: how do you truly worship God? It starts by a change of a mindset. We change our actions by the way we change our thinking. Now, he then goes on into where he wants our thinking to change, and it's very different. So he says this, in Romans chapter 12, verse 4 and 5, he continues with this changed thought process, and he says this: now, just as our bodies have many parts and each part has a special function, so it is with Christ's body. By the way, when he's talking about Christ's body, who is he talking about? He's talking about us as a church. When we get together, we function. Paul says he uses this term like a body. So it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body, and we all belong to each other. Where Paul is pulling us to, and he's telling us to change our thinking pattern towards, he's asking us to, hey, what is a proper way to show God that you love him? Change your thinking patterns by the way you think about others around you. We are told that when we've made a choice to follow Jesus Christ, when we gather together as a body or as a family, as a church, whichever word we want to use, we come together as different with one purpose. We come together, and Paul says you belong to each other. As you build each other up, as you encourage one another, as you talk to each other, Paul says you are different, but you belong to each other. Now, to put this in a way that we understand, Jesus is telling us, or Paul is telling us, that our lives are to be lived out for other followers of Jesus Christ. Paul says that when we come to church, our thinking pattern is to stop and, hey, we purposely work on trying to make church as accessible and as comfortable as we can. We put coffee and donuts out because why? Is it spiritual? Does it make you love Jesus more? I don't know. Good donuts always do good things. Good coffee always does good things. But there's nothing spiritual about them. We do it because it allows us to feel good and comfortable. But sometimes we begin to assess, why do we go to church based upon what's in it for me? And Paul is saying you need to change that mindset. Church or doing life together is not simply what you get out of it, it's what you put into it. Paul is reminding us that our lives are to be lived out for others. In the same way that we are called to show love and respect in our families, Paul is saying as we get together to do life together as followers of Jesus Christ, we're to show love and respect towards others. In a sense, Paul is calling us a family. Now, we know the saying, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. Why do we say that? Because your family is like my family. It is complicated. It is messy. Your family, I could be wrong, but I just am going to assume your family is like my family. In your family, there's people who have differing opinions. There are people who vote different ways. There are people who disagree with you. There are people in your family who think you're the odd one out. And then there's Uncle John and Aunt, and they really are the odd ones out. And we understand that we are not always capable of choosing our families. But we still accept and love and care for our families. Paul is reminding them that as we get together, we are called to do life together as a family. You are to come and be as a body, even when you do not necessarily always see eye to eye. Paul knew this was not going to be easy. So, you know what he does? He methodically goes through chapter 12 and tells us how we should do life together when we get together as a church or as a family or as a body. He actually gets practical in how do you show your love for God in a way that is proper. He says, let me show you some practical ways how you love others and care for others and show your love for God. Now, you would think that if we're going to show our love for God, it should be in some great things such as, how much do I feel Him? How deep can I know Him? How much studying? How much can I learn about Him? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. But what Paul reminds us is that our service and our love for God is actually practical, not hard, but it's not easy. So he continues on in Romans chapter 12, verse 6, and he starts by saying this. In His grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. How do you practically show your love for God when you get together with each other? Well, Paul starts and he says this, just let me remind you, each of you are different, and some of you guys are really brilliant in one area that someone else is not. The way that we show our love for God is simply by doing what He has made us to be. The talents, the skills that you have, you are to be. Paul will continue on, and we're not going to look at it all, but Paul continues on by saying, hey, some of you guys are great leaders, lead well. Some of you guys are great, generous people, well, then be generous. Some of you guys are very hospitable people, be hospitable. Some of you guys know how to stop and listen. Well, then listen well. Paul is not calling us to be spiritual in the fact that you need to get to know God more by learning more. That's always good. But Paul is saying we show our love towards others by being who we are. by taking what I am good at, by listening, by caring, by loving, by sharing, by being whatever it is, and being who he has made me. Paul says to be who we are made to be is actually showing our love for him. He's not done yet. As he continues this, Paul goes on to say this. As you continue to get together with each other and as you use your own abilities of whoever you are for others, if you make the best fried chicken, make the best fried chicken. Do this. Don't just pretend to love each other's. Really love each other. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection. And take delight in honoring each other. Paul says we need to be real in our care for others. How do you show love for God? By being real in how you care for others. There's a little saying that says, fake it till you make it. I get it, because there are times when we know we need to do something and we don't feel like doing it and we just do it because. Paul is saying this. Change your thinking pattern so that you can become who God has called you to become. Paul is not calling us to fake it. He's calling us to change our thought process. Don't just pretend to care for others. Truly care for others. Why do we need to change thought pattern? Because I got to be honest, you know who I really am? Even as pastor, you know what really goes through my thought? What's in it for me? Do I really need to go help them? And you know what I know about you? You struggle with the same things I do. Paul was calling us to change our thought process so that we become not just people who talk about loving each other, but people who put into practice a reality of what it looks like to love each other. He continues on by saying this. In order to help make this possible, Paul goes down to Romans chapter 12, verse 16. And by the way, there's a few verses in between. You notice I'm skipping through. We'll hopefully hit some of those on Tuesday night, okay? But Paul reminds us, how do we really do this? Well, verse 16, he continues with this. Live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people. And I love the way he puts this. And don't think you know it all. Paul is looking into us and he says, guys, if you're going to truly love God, if you're going to truly serve others, here's what you got to do. You got to just take the talents that God has given you. You've got to take it, and then you got to be real with it, and then you got to keep your pride under control. You've got to stop and work to hold your pride, keep it in check, because you know what I know? No one can do it as good as I can do it. I know that about you too. What you're good at, you know no one's as good at it as you are. And Paul is looking at us saying, look, God has given you skills and talents, and you may be the best there is at it, but keep your pride under check. Understand this. You cannot truly care for others if you're going, yeah, but I can do this better. He makes sure that he ends by saying this: don't be too proud to enjoy the company of, now, ordinary people, because Paul knows the way our brain thinks. I will tolerate you. Paul's saying, no, that's not the way we look at people. We care for. Don't think you know it all. One of the things that I have learned through life that I continue to try to practice is I really work, and hear me out when I say this, I really work to try to be the smartest guy in the room, but I always assume I am not. You know what I'm trying to say? I come in trying to say I want to ask questions because I want to know, what do I need to know? I want to know what I don't know. I care to be this. I like to think that I'm learning. But I always assume I am not the smartest guy in the room. I can't be. I'm trying to be, but I know I'm not. And Paul is saying this: never think you know it all. As we're getting close to the end, I want to look at one more. Paul says this: I want you to go just a little bit deeper. As he stops and he says, I want you to use your skill. If you're going to truly love God the way you love God and you love others, take what he's given you and use your gift, who you are. If you are a talker, talk. If you are a handshaker, handshake. If you are a hugger, hug. If you are a fried chicken maker, be a fried chicken. Whatever it is God gives us, use that to care for others. Take that ability, and Paul says, use it to truly care for others, and then keep your pride in check as you use your special skill to help others. But then he goes and he says, I want to kind of conclude with an idea that we should all know. Verse 18, do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. What does our duty look like? What does it mean to truly love God? Paul says, as much as is within your capability, be at peace with everyone. All right. This is a strange statement. Paul is writing to followers of Jesus Christ who he's told them they need to look at and look out for each other as followers of Jesus Christ. Isn't it normal and natural that we all just get along with each other? If I love Jesus and you love Jesus and we love each other, doesn't that mean we just are at peace with each other? I wish it was true. The problem is that Paul reminds us as he's closing this little section, how do you truly show your love for God? By showing your love for others. And he just makes this so practical. He's not calling us to some amazing act of sacrifice. This act of sacrifice that we're saying, well, maybe God will just say, give 15% of your income and all will be well. Or just do this and all will be, and Paul is saying this act of sacrifice, of living a life that is holy and good, it's about simply being who God has called you to be. It's about simple living of what does a follower of Jesus Christ look like? It's so simple, but yet it is so hard because it goes against the nature we're born with. Why does Paul call us to change our mindset? Because our more normal mindset calls us into looking after number one. Be at peace with everyone. Now, as Paul is making the statement, he realizes three things. One, our goal should always be peace. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. There's a problem. none of us want to do what we can to be at peace. We do not seek peace. We seek to be in front. In all that we do, we seek for our team to be the winning team. If you're following football right now, seeking peace is not what you are doing. Now, I don't know about Rusty. He's at that point where it's all right with Alabama there. We're seeking peace this year. But if you're a fan of football, you do not go, I want my team to go out and say, guys, let's all have peace together. You want them to do what? Crush the opposition. If you are in a business or a company, by the way, Apple did not get where it was by looking at IBM going, we just want to make peace with IBM. What did they do? How do we crush the competition? When you go in to vote, what do you do and what are you hoping for? You're hoping in voting for your party to make peace. No, you're not. The problem is that we take this and we begin to live this actual mentality out. We want to be on top. And Paul's going, the greatness that God calls us to is not like the greatness of this world. The greatness that I'm calling you to is a greatness that is upside down, where it causes you to look at others and says, how can I help you? How can we be at peace? How can we solve problems? So Paul, as he writes this, makes it very clear our goal should always be at peace, but he's also making this very clear statement. Do all that you can to live in peace. Which means what? Peace is not always possible. Paul is understanding the reality that this is that there is a broken world we live in, and even as followers of Jesus Christ, as we get together, there are sometimes that our differences continue to clash. Now, he's saying your goal should always be, but he's also being real. As much as you can, be at peace. Peace is not always possible. There are times when no matter what you do, you cannot make someone be at peace with you. But Paul is looking at us and he's saying this. Do all that you can to be at peace. So Paul is flipping this upside down, saying not just be at peace with everyone. He's saying, I understand that peace is the goal and that you will not always be able to make it happen. But as much as it relies on you, be at peace. You cannot control someone else's behavior or their attitude, but you can control yours. You cannot control what someone else says. You cannot control what someone else thinks, but you can control what you say, and you can control what you think. You cannot control the actions of others, but you are in full control of our own actions, aren't we? And Paul is looking at us and he's saying, even as we get together as followers of Jesus Christ, we don't always get along. I just find that he's being real, he's being honest, but he says, how do you truly show your love for God? By how you treat others. Others, he says, and I'm not talking about I'm talking about those of us who say we love each other, we love God, and we're all coming to worship God together. I mean, we should all be able to raise our hands and sing Kumbaya together, shouldn't we? And Paul is saying that should be our goal. But I understand as we conclude this, he says, it's as much as is possible. Your goal should be peace, to care, to love, and respect. But peace is not always possible because you cannot control other people, but you can control you as much as it lies within you. Don't worry about the other guy. This is easy to say on Sunday morning. You guys hear me say this all the time. These sermons are easy to preach Sunday morning when we sit there and we go, okay, yeah, I hear it. But the reality is this. Life doesn't live out like it preaches on Sunday morning. Because there's always that person. Sometimes there's this person. And this person battles with himself, let alone that person who is just as much as we stop and as much as we want, sometimes there is a reality that things do not match up to the way I desire them to be. But Paul's very clear. Our love for God, our reasonable sacrifice, the way that we sacrifice ourselves in a way that lives itself out, that is good, Paul says happens when we change our mindset in order so that we live out differently before others. We have to change that mindset because if we don't change that mindset, our normal mindset will simply continue to go in what's in it for me. How do I get the most out of it? And Paul is saying we have to change our mindset in order that we can look at how do we care for and serve others. Jesus calls us to greatness. Can I say this? Every person you know who can truly live their life out this way, you admire and you respect them. That doesn't mean we necessarily want to be them, though, does it? Sometimes we can know and admire something and yet find it, I don't know if I can do that. Jesus says, I call you to greatness. But if you're going to learn to be great, you're going to have to know what it means to serve. If you want to know what it means to be great, you're going to have to learn how do you learn to push others up. If you're going to be great, you've got to learn how not to flaunt the gifts and the talents that I've given to you. If you're going to be great, you've got to learn how to be at peace, not crush the opposition. And on that note, come back next week and we will push it even harder because he's not done. We are called to greatness, and we get it. Greatness within our families, greatness with those who we are doing life together and trying to serve him and love him together. Okay, we can, but he's not done. The greatness he calls us to gets uncomfortable, but it changes the world.